Today I'm going to show you how this jig can save you hundreds, even thousands. A little while back I showed you a quick hack using a level as a straight edge to get clean cuts on a table saw. You guys had a ton of great feedback in the comments, so I headed back to the shop and built this. Now using a level works great for straightening a crooked edge, but it can't flatten the face of a board, and that's where this jig changes the game. It straightens edges, flattens faces, and saves you hundreds, even thousands compared to buying big, expensive joiners. Plus, you'll be able to buy rough sawn hardwood instead of expensive pre-milled boards, putting the money right back into your pocket. In this video, I'll show you exactly how to use this jig, and if you stick around to the end, I'll even show you how easy it is to build one yourself. Let's get started. This jig is built on a 3/4 inch plywood base. I'll detail the dimensions and placement during the build portion. I added 3 pieces of T-track to hold down an adjustable fence. I mounted hold-down clamps to the fence for holding the boards in place, and on one end I added a cleat for keeping the boards from shifting when planing the faces. Simple, adjustable, and ready to flatten boards. Let's get to it. I removed the fence for this process of planing the maple. I secured the board to the jig using hot glue. I placed playing cards under uneven portions of the board so it's fully supported. With everything secure and stable, I run the entire jig through the planer. I take light passes, planing just the top surface until it's completely flat across the entire face. Once the face is flat, I pop the board off the jig, remove any glue, and flip it over. Now using the freshly flattened face as my reference, I run the board back through the planer to smooth out the opposite side. And just like that, I've got a perfectly flat surface board. Now that the maple is planed flat, I place it back into the jig with just a slight overhang where I'll be ripping. Next, I reinstall the adjustable fence, sliding it snug up against the edge of the board. Using the T-bolts and star knobs, I tighten the fence securely to the T-track. Then I clamp the board down using the hold-down clamps to keep everything locked in place during the cut. At the table saw, I adjust the fence so the jig itself clears the table. The only thing that contacts the blade is the maple, keeping the jig safe and the cut clean. Now the piece is ready to rip the final size. I used a new straight edge as my reference against the table saw fence to rip the boards to my desired width. This maple is getting ripped down to use as edging for my miter saw station. If you want to see that project coming soon, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you don't miss it. And if you're enjoying this video so far, a thumbs up really helps me out and helps the channel grow. I really appreciate the support. Alright, now let's jump into how I built this joiner jig. Let's start with the base. I ripped this piece down to 12 inches wide and kept it 8 feet long. Since my planer is 13 inches wide, I need the jig to just stay under that to pass through cleanly. At the end of the base, I attached a 4x12 inch cleat. This gives the piece being planed a solid edge to rest against, keeps both the jig and the wood moving together through the planer. Next, I'm installing 3 T-tracks into the base. I measured and marked 2 tracks 8 inches from each edge and one directly down the center. The T-tracks I'm using are just a hair under 3/4 of an inch wide, so I'm using a 3/4 inch straight bit in my router for a snug fit. I square up each T-track, mark both sides for reference, and repeat the process for all 3 tracks. To set the router depth, I'm using a 3/8 of an inch setup block. The T-track sits just slightly below the surface, so this gives me the perfect cut depth. I'll place the setup block on the base of the router and plunge it until it barely touches. I measure the offset from the outside of the router base to the bit and clamp a straight edge into the jig base. With that in place, I make 2 passes with the router to sneak up on my final depth, lightly sanding the edges afterward to clean up any sharp edges. I repeat the same steps for the remaining 2 slots. Once the slots are cut, I move on to the T-track itself. To cut the aluminum track, I use a regular saw blade, moving slowly to avoid chipping. After cutting, I file and sand the rough edges smooth for a clean, easy fit. Since the plywood is only about 3/8 of an inch thick, under the slot I want extra holding power, so I'm bonding the T-track with epoxy and screws. I sand the back of each track for better epoxy adhesion. Then mix up a 2-part epoxy in a 1:1 mix ratio. I spread a thin layer of epoxy into the routed groove, press the T-track into place, wipe away any squeeze out, and hand tighten the screws into the base. I repeat that process for each of the 3 tracks. Now it's time for the adjustable fence. I rip the piece down to 2.5 inches wide and keep it 8 feet long. I lay the fence into the base, lining it up with the edge, and mark where the center of each T-track falls underneath. I drill 5/16 inch holes at each mark so that the T-bolts can pass through. After that, I slide the T-bolts into the tracks, place the fence on top, and tighten it down using the star knobs. This setup makes the fence fully adjustable anywhere along the jig. Finally, it's time to add the hold-down clamps. I start by marking out the mounting holes for each clamp, pre-drill those spots, and then hand tighten the screws so I don't blow out the plywood. I repeat the process for the remaining 3 clamps. This joiner jig is going to save you time, money, and shop space, especially if you're working in a smaller shop.